Hi there. Welcome to Igneus Press podcast. Today we're going to talk about early Igneus Press and W.E.Butts with an interview of Peter Kidd. W.E.Butts first released The Required Dance with Igneus Press in 1990. This book set the course for W.E.Butts to become the Poet Laureate of New Hampshire. This manuscript coalesced around the mid-1980s Stone Soup poetry scene. Stone Soup actually originated in the 1970s at a bookstore owned by Jack Powers. Fast forward 14 years, Stone Soup poetry is now being held at T.T. the Bear's in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Today we reach deep into the archives of Igneus Press and we pull out its first title, The Required Dance by W.E.Butts. Peter Kidd will talk about the circumstances in which Igneus Press and his friendship with W.E.Butts came together to create the first title for Igneus Press back in 1990. Welcome everybody to Igneus Press. I'm here today with Peter Kidd, the publisher of Igneus Press. That's a really interesting term, the multiculture. Are you talking about mass culture or mainstream culture? I think
talking about both when I say multiculture. That I'm leaving room for a third culture, as yet unstated.
I like that, leaving room for a third culture, as yet unstated.
Yeah.
Creating that space, holding that space.
Isn't that what the artist is after? It's really a vision, is what it is. For me, when I have a vision of something, and I don't even know about it. It just comes through so clearly that, quick like a bounce, I write it down. Without knowing any meaning of it whatsoever. I know if it didn't have meaning, it wouldn't have made it through with such force. But I think, the poet feels like there's a language above that which we all have learned to communicate with. I mean, think about it. Poetry is probably the only art form in which you don't have to have anything. Music, you generally got to have an instrument. Or amplifier or whatever. But poetry you don't need anything for. So it's like I've always said, there's this sort of unconscious negative attitude towards a poet, even from other artists, because those other artists need a pen or paint or a pencil or paper, whereas a poet can just sing out.
Ah, you're referring to the oral tradition of poetry, the minnesinger, the singer.
I should have pre-stated that position from the beginning. I'm most definitely 100% oral tradition poet.
Many of the Igneus poets that you have worked with, or many of the poets that became poets with Igneus Press, did you hear them for the first time reading aloud? Was that?
Yeah, a lot of them I did. Yeah. Wally I did, Bill I did, Dick I did. I didn't Blevins. Okay, I'd met him, but I hadn't got to know him yet. Most of the I saw dirge of small press coming out, and I saw the directions that most of them were going in, both with form of the book and both with the form and voice of the content of the book. And I didn't feel very turned on by any of it. It seemed like a contest for everybody to look alike, and that doesn't interest me much. I want a whole frame of reference. And so it's like when poets give me a manuscript and they're all filled with their Superman poems. And I go, try again. It's like I want vulnerability. I want to see how far your depth reaches. I don't want to hear all the great poems where you save the day.
Is that part of a belief that good art and in that good poetry arises out of the individual's engagement with suffering?
No, I don't buy into that. I once, I tried to think it through for about 10 years. I don't think that's it so much. I think the suffering actually impacts who you are as a person, and then you absorb that when you go to the poem. So it's not a part of the poem, but I don't think it's the a priori. Let's call it the poes, or the origin of the poem.
I see. Well, let's talk a little bit about the actual start of Igneus Press.
Sure, yeah.
Did Wally come first, or did Igneus come first, or did they arise together? And
they came together. They came at the same time. He and I rubbed heads. He says, I got a manuscript. I gave it to Jack.
Jack Powers.
Yeah.
Who ran the Stone Soup venue.
Yeah. Bless his soul.
Mm-hmm.
I always think of Jack. I always think, what's sadder than an Irishman without a beer? So Jack was, he had this thing on some shelf somewhere. He hadn't seen it since the day Wally gave it to him, I'm sure. So Wally came to me and he said, I'm going to talk to Jack one more time, and then I'll talk to you about this book. I said, you do that, definitely. So Wally said, is it possible, what's the status of that, is what he said. And Jack said, oh man, everything's cool, just send it to me. And here's Wally. He's been sitting there thinking for 8 months.
That Jack had been looking at
Jack's been considering his
and Jack
book.
hadn't even registered it.
He doesn't even know he has it.
Oh.
He said, Wally, send it to me.
Well, good thing you had a backup. So then he came to you.
So then he came to me and told me the story. He knew he couldn't get away with it without telling me the story. And so I laughed like a bastard and said, all right, Wally, we'll do it. He had done a couple books that ran a couple issues. He had some knowledge, as to the forms and so forth. And I had the business savvy and how to get things done. And that's the problem with a poet, is very often they'll start something and then they go on to another thing, gets their attention. And unless they're very strong and know what they're doing and set themselves like a 4 or 5 part agenda, they never come back around to do what they said they were going to do.
Sure. And so this was 1989 when you started talking about this.
I guess that's about right, about 89.
Let's take a look at this book. The Required Dance was the first title of Igneus Press. It was put out in 1990.
So it was an interesting project. So Wally basically came out to my house every weekend for about 6 or 7 weeks, I'd say. And we would spend a day and a half working on the book, getting it organized, collecting things, getting the blurbs together, putting there's a lot more work goes into making a book than people suspect. I remember I got it typeset for me in Manchester, and I got a quote to do it. It was expensive, probably the most expensive size-wise of all the books I ever did, but that's cool. We were just getting started, and we needed to learn the process. So we got the book out, and that was exciting. And we had a book party at the Piano Factory, James DeCrescentis, Deke's house, and it's a place where artists initially had rented all the apartments and were subsidized rent, and it's slowly been changing. It's where it's almost no artists in it. But at the time, it was a great spot. And so we had a reading in the room there, and we probably had 60, 70 people come, which was a tribute to Wally. You know, everybody really loved Wally as a person. He was a really good soul. And, you know, I know we sold 50 or 60 books. You know, Wally sold most of what he had. He had his percentage of the run. So it was a shock to see that you could get, you know, we basically got our money back out of it in that first night almost, you know. And it never happened again, but it was good then.
So did you publish this manuscript the way that it came to you, or did you...
Did I edit it?
Did you edit it?
If I edited Wally's, I would edit it very little, you know. It was pretty well manicured by the time I got it. In future ones, I would edit more. And it just depends on who it is. Bill Kemet, I edit some. Blevins, I edited quite a bit. Took me a long time to get through editing his book.
Which book was that?
Three Sleeps, a historical romance. And so different people, you know, some people I literally, they write a group of poems and hand them to me and tell me to make a book out of it. They don't trust their sense of, and I get it. As a poet, I have sometimes feel a poem is just weak. It just doesn't have what it needs, but it haunts me. It won't let go. It won't jump into the weak basket. You know, what it is it stimulates a part of me that's unsure of everything. And I don't know whether I should be confessing that or not.
Well, you have.
I have, yeah, that's true.
Thank you so much for watching today's video about the early Igneus Press years and W.E.Butts. Have a beautiful day.